The rain didn't fall that evening. It poured sheets of water, hammered the cracked pavement of Riverdale like the sky itself was grieving. The wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling loose shutters and bending the tired branches of oak trees that had seen better years through the storm. A shadow emerged. She was limping a German shepherd, once magnificent, now barely a ghost of what she used to be. Her fur was soaked and streaked with mud, ribs visible beneath the matted coat. Her eyes, though tired, burned with something deeper than instinct. Desperation wrapped carefully in her jaws was a fragile bundle of fur, barely the size of a shoe, a puppy shivering and silent. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if she had a mission and couldn't afford to fail down the block at the faded wooden bus stop on Maple Street. 6-year-old Emma Wilson stood alone, a red umbrella clenched in her small hands. The bus was late. Her rain boots squelched in the puddles, and her brown eyes stared down the road that disappeared into the mist. She hadn't spoken in 73 days, not since her father died. When the soldiers came to the door, her world had stopped. Robert Wilson, Staff Sergeant K, 9 handler deployed with the 75th Ranger Regiment, killed in action. The words were carved into her memory like tombstones. Since that day, Emma hadn't said a word, not at school, not at home, not to her mother Sarah, who tried everything short of magic to bring her back. Emma just drew page after page of her father, always with a dog at his side. So when the broken shadow stepped into the glow of the flickering street light, Emma didn't scream. The dog stopped a few feet away, her legs shook carefully. She bent down and placed the tiny puppy at Emma's feet. Then she did something no one could explain. She cried, not a whimper, not a growl. It was a deep, guttural sob that rose from her chest, like thunder raw and human in its grief. Tears, real tears, mixed with rain on her muzzle as she looked between the girl and the pup. Emma blinked, stunned. Then her voice came hoarse and soft. "Hi there, are you okay?" The moment the words left her lips, the shepherd let out a breath, almost like a sigh of relief. Emma knelt down, reaching with trembling fingers toward the puppy. It was barely breathing, its fur damp and its limbs limp. She cradled it in her coat instinctively. "You want me to help him?" The shepherd nudged the puppy forward gently with her nose, then stepped back. Emma looked up at her rain dripping from her bangs. "Come," she whispered, patting her leg like she'd seen her dad do in videos. The shepherd obeyed. They walked the 4 blocks home together in silence. The town was still, most windows shuttered against the cold. No one saw the girl, the dog and the half-life puppy as they moved like ghosts between pools of lamplight. When Sarah Wilson opened the door to find her daughter soaked, cradling a puppy in her coat and a full-grown German shepherd at her side, she didn't know whether to scream or cry. "Emma, what in the world? Get away from that dog!" Emma stepped back, clutching the pup tighter. "She brought him to me," she said quickly. Her voice broken but real filled the hallway like a miracle. Sarah froze. Her eyes darted to the shepherd, who stood perfectly still. Gaze focused, but not threatening, then to the puppy barely moving. "Unsure whether she was dreaming, just for tonight," she said finally, her voice thin. "But tomorrow we call someone." That night, while Emma curled up on the couch with the puppy nestled in a blanket, the shepherd laid down at her feet like a soldier on duty. Sarah stood in the kitchen watching them both, heart full of questions, and something else she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope out in the darkness. The storm moved on, but inside that little house in Riverdale, something had begun. The rain hadn't stopped by morning, only softened to a persistent drizzle that clung to everything. Riverdale's narrow streets shone slick with water, reflecting the bare branches of winter trees and the faded Christmas lights that hadn't been taken down inside the Wilson home. Warmth was still a fragile thing, especially for Sarah, who hadn't slept more than an hour, and for Emma, who sat curled on the couch in her pajamas, holding a bundle of damp towels wrapped around the tiny puppy. Athena lay beside them on the rug, watchful every time the puppy whimpered. The mother dog shifted ears, perked body tense. Sarah watched this silent interaction, unsure what unsettled her more, the wounded state of the puppy or the unshakable, almost human grief she thought she saw in the dog's eyes. Sarah had been on the phone all morning, first with the Animal Control Office voicemail, then the nearest vet clinic that could squeeze them in. Dr. Michael Thompson, the town's longtime veterinarian, agreed to see them at noon. Until then, she cleaned the puppy as best she could, boiled chicken for food, and did what she hadn't done in a long time. Prayed Emma had not stopped speaking since last night. Not much, just a whisper here, a question there. But every word was like hearing sunlight. She talked to Athena like an old friend, asking if the puppy was her baby, if she was hurt too, if maybe she had known Emma's dad. Sarah wanted to stop her. Explain that dogs don't cry, don't remember things the way people do. Don't know how to pick the one house in town where someone might actually listen. But she couldn't because deep down she wasn't so sure anymore. At the vet clinic, Dr. Thompson greeted them with a frown that softened when he saw Emma's face and the soaked towel in her arms. Athena followed at Sarah's heels, her gait stiff but steady. She ignored the other animals in the waiting room and went straight to the examination door as if she'd been there before. "This way," Dr. Thompson said. Leading them to the back inside, he examined the puppy gently, then ran tests. His tone was clinical, but his hands were careful, severely underweight, dehydrated, likely no more than 2 weeks old. He paused, listening to the heartbeat. There's a murmur. Could be a congenital defect. We'll need more imaging to be sure. Sarah's stomach sank. The way he said it told her everything, as the puppy was placed in an incubator. Emma turned to Athena and whispered, "Hang in there, Hero." Dr. Thompson raised a brow. "Hero." "That's his name," Emma said, without hesitation. Dr. Thompson glanced at Athena, then back at Sarah. "And the mother?" Sarah hesitated. "We call her Athena. My husband used to talk about a dog he worked with overseas. I think this might be her." The vet stepped closer to Athena, who let him approach. Without flinching, he gently brushed back fur from her shoulder, revealing a faded tattoo. Military working dog standard issue. ID mark, I'd bet money. She's the same dog your husband handled. Sarah's knees felt weak. "She's been through hell," Dr. Thompson said. "Old injuries scarred, but healed. Malnourished. Yes, but there's a strength here and loyalty that doesn't fade the door." He examined the puppy gently, then ran tests. His tone was clinical, but his hands were careful, severely underweight. Creaked and Emma peeked back into the room. "She's staying with us, right?" Sarah looked at Athena, then at Hero, the puppy who'd been handed to her daughter like some sacred offering. "Yes," she said, "at least for now." That evening, Sarah called Mrs. Jenkins. The older woman arrived with soup and quiet wisdom. She didn't ask many questions. She just watched Emma fall asleep, beside Athena Hero, nestled in the crook of the girl's arm, and said, "We don't always choose who needs saving. Sometimes they choose us." Word spread quickly in Riverdale. A few neighbors dropped off blankets. One brought puppy formula. Someone else slipped an envelope of cash into Sarah's mailbox. No name, just a note for Hero. By the next day, the community buzzed. Mrs. Jenkins began organizing a fundraiser. The fire department offered their haul. Emma made hand-drawn flyers, a picture of a sad puppy and a brave dog beneath the words, "Help Hero's Heart." Sarah started to hope just a little, and that terrified her. That night she sat alone in the living room after Emma had gone to bed. Athena lay near the fireplace, head on her paws, eyes open but unreadable. Sarah looked at the scars along the dog's flank, the muscle memory in her movements, and the way she seemed to take up space without demanding it. "You found us," Sarah whispered. You really found us. Athena's ears twitched, but she didn't move outside. The rain had finally stopped leaving. The world hushed, and waiting inside, something long dormant stirred a chance, a spark, a beginning. And for the first time in months, Sarah let herself believe that maybe not yet, but someday they might be okay. The morning after the visit to the vet clinic brought more than just the chill of a Riverdale autumn. It brought a different kind of weight, the type that settled in Sarah's chest as she watched her daughter sit quietly on the living room floor, cradling Hero in a nest of blankets. Athena sat nearby, motionless, except for her ears twitching with every small sound. Sarah stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee she hadn't taken a sip from in 10 minutes. The documents Dr. Thompson had given her the day before still lay on the counter. One page caught her eye again, a faded tattoo number matched to a K9 unit once assigned to Staff Sergeant Robert Wilson. Unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses, a woman in business attire flanked him, holding a slim black briefcase. "Mrs. Wilson," the man asked. "My name is Thomas Carter. I represent a private defense contractor that formerly trained and managed working dogs for the military." He extended a hand. Sarah didn't take it. "I'm here regarding an animal that was recently reported unofficially to be in your custody. K9, asset number 237. We believe you've been housing her under the name Athena. She's not an asset." Sarah said, her voice steady. "She's family." Mercer stepped into the doorway behind her. "You have no jurisdiction here." Carter offered a thin smile. "On the contrary, Colonel Mercer. I'm here under assigned authority from Precision Tactical. K9 Solutions. When the military decommissions a dog, the company retains proprietary rights. She belongs to us." Athena growled low in her throat. Emma, standing behind Sarah, instinctively placed a hand on the dog's back. "We're not discussing this here," Mercer said. "If you have paperwork, submit it through the proper legal channels." "Of course," Carter said smoothly. "But consider this a courtesy. Next time I won't be alone." They left without another word, but not without impact. Sarah closed the door, her hands trembling. "They're not going to stop," she said. "No," Mercer admitted. "But now we know what we're dealing with that night after Emma fell asleep on the couch with Hero curled against her stomach and Athena keeping silent vigil." Sarah pulled out a box of Robert's things. She hadn't opened in months. Inside were letters, pictures, and a flash drive. She booted up the old laptop. The flash drive contained logs, emails Robert had sent to himself, training notes, and one folder simply labeled confidential inside it. Sarah found a report outlining repeated concerns about training abuses in a military K9, program dogs pushed to hard litters, bred with known genetic issues. A familiar name leapt out from the document. Thomas Carter. Sarah's breath caught. The next morning she drove to the vet clinic. Dr. Thompson welcomed her into his office, frowning at the manila folder in her hands. "I need your help," she said, "and maybe your contacts later that week." The fundraiser took shape. Mrs. Jenkins spearheaded the community side, wrangling the town's older folks. Like a General, Emma helped with flyers, her voice growing steadier with each conversation, her confidence returning. Piece by piece, people responded. Old neighbors brought baked goods. Local businesses donated gift cards. The fire station offered to host the event, but beneath the surface of Riverdale's generosity, whispers stirred. A few parents were uneasy about Athena, worried about a combat dog living so close to children. A petition circulated, anonymous in origin, urging. The old laptop, the flash drive contained logs, emails Robert had sent to himself, training notes, and Sarah to surrender Athena for safety reasons. When Sarah found the flyer tacked to her mailbox, she stood staring at it for a long moment. Athena sat at her side, silent, calm, like a statue of patience and pain. "They don't know you," Sarah murmured. "But I do. Robert did." On the night before the fundraiser, Sarah sat beside Mercer on her back porch, the air thick with frost and something heavier. "Carter won't come quietly, will he?" she asked. "No," Mercer said. "And he's not just after Athena anymore. There's something in those files Robert kept. Something Carter needs to bury permanently." Sarah looked toward the living room window where Emma slept beside Hero. Athena was curled at her feet. "We're not giving her up," she said. Mercer nodded slowly. "Then we'd better be ready for whatever comes next Saturday." Dawned gray and restless, the kind of morning where even the birds hesitated to sing. Sarah stood by the window watching a thin layer of fog cling to the ground like a warning inside the house. Stirred to quiet motion, Emma wrapping Hero in his blanket for their trip to the vet clinic. Athena pacing her gait, stiff alert today, was supposed to be about hope. Hero's surgery was scheduled for 9 a.m., and despite the nerves, there was a sense of fragile anticipation. Sarah clung to that feeling. She had no idea how quickly it would unravel. Dr. Thompson met them at the back entrance of the clinic, already in his scrubs. "Let's get him prepped," he said softly. "Dr. Chen should be arriving within the hour." Sarah carried Hero while Emma held Athena's leash as they stepped inside. None of them noticed the sleek black SUV parked across the street with its engine idling. It was only once Hero was settled in the pre-op suite and Sarah stepped back into the waiting room that she saw them. Thomas Carter standing just inside the front entrance, flanked by a woman in a sharp navy suit and a uniformed animal control officer. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson," Carter said, his voice oiled with politeness. "We're here to reclaim government property." Sarah didn't move. "This is a vet clinic. If you want to speak, you can wait until after the procedure." "I'm afraid we can't do that," the woman said, presenting a folder. "This is a lawful order of repossession. The animal known as K9237 was decommissioned to Precision Tactical and remains their property behind, Sarah." Athena stepped forward, ears forward, muscles coiled like a wire. Emma moved protectively in front of her, small but fierce. "She's not property," the girl said, voice quiet but clear. "She saved Hero. She saved us." Dr. Thompson emerged frowning. "This animal is under medical watch. You're not taking her anywhere today." The tension broke when the clinic door burst open again. Officer James Anderson of the Riverdale Police Department strode in, followed by Colonel Mercer. "Step away from the dog," Anderson ordered. Carter's composure cracked. "You have no jurisdiction here." "We do now," Mercer cut in. "Mr. Carter, you're being investigated in connection with fraud and animal abuse. You'll come with us for questioning." The animal control. "Here, you saved him." Athena stayed completely still. Only her eyes moved, locked on the door where Hero had gone. 3 hours later, the surgery was underway when Mercer and Anderson returned with answers. The card contained footage from Athena's mission with Robert, the final mission, and it changed everything. Athena hadn't just vanished. She had been taken along with other dogs. Carter's company repurposed after losing their military contract. They were sold off, hidden from the military. Hero, it turned out. Wasn't 3 weeks had passed since Hero's second surgery, and the Wilson house had shifted from a space of mourning to one of recovery. Emma's laughter returned slowly, like sunlight stretching across a winter morning. The living room still bore signs of chaos: towels draped over chairs, an IV stand tucked in the corner, and boxes of dog toys scattered across the floor. But it also pulsed with a quiet energy that hadn't existed since Robert's death. Hero, once frail and fighting for each breath, now toddled after Emma with a clumsy charm that made Sarah smile, despite herself. His legs were still uncertain, his stamina short, but each step felt like a small miracle. Athena remained his unwavering shadow, ever watchful, Ever present, the German shepherd seemed to have shed years since the day she arrived. Her coat growing thicker, her eyes more alert, she had in every way resumed her role as guardian. Riverdale hadn't forgotten the town's outpouring, had turned into an ongoing wave of support. A local hardware store donated fencing materials for a secure backyard enclosure. The middle school art club painted a mural outside the veterinary clinic, a silhouette of Athena standing proud beneath the words, "Loyalty never leaves." One crisp morning, Sarah sat with Colonel Jack Mercer on the back porch, watching Emma toss a small ball that Hero enthusiastically chased for 2 feet before tumbling over himself. Athena retrieved it instead, bringing it back with quiet dignity. "He's coming along faster than we expected," Mercer said, sipping from a mug Sarah had filled with black coffee. Dr. Chen called it unprecedented. Sarah nodded, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her. "It's more than medicine, it's them. Athena and Emma, he has more than a heartbeat. Now he has a home." Mercer glanced toward Athena. "She's earned that medal 10 times over, and the foundation," he pulled a brochure from his coat, "has been approved. The Robert Wilson K9 Legacy Fund. It'll provide veterinary care and rehoming for retiring service dogs. You and Emma started something big." Sarah held the brochure, fingers brushing the raised print of Robert's name. For a moment she said nothing. That weekend the town gathered again, this time not in worry, but in celebration. Riverdale's community center had never looked so alive. Red, white, and blue ribbons danced from every beam, and folding chairs filled with friends, neighbors, veterans, and strangers who'd read about Athena and Hero in the state news. Colonel Mercer stood at the front, flanked by a small honor guard. Emma believed her. At first they smiled, politely, called her brave, said she must be confused or lucky, or maybe hallucinating. But some didn't smile. Some leaned in, listened a little harder, heard the steadiness in her voice, the lack of fantasy in how she told the story. A few of them began to wonder, and one of them, a ranger named Cole Barrett, did more than wonder. He was quiet, observant, the kind of man who didn't waste words or time when the press left and the station emptied. He came and sat beside Ellie while she waited for her mother to arrive from Portland. He didn't ask the usual questions. Instead, he showed her a faded photo from a file, a black and white image of a wolf, massive, battle-worn, with pale amber eyes and a dark streak down his back. "This the one?" he asked. Ellie looked at it, then nodded without hesitation. "That's Ash." Barrett didn't react, not at first. Then he sat back and whistled low. "Thought he was just a story." He muttered. "Some say he was a military dog left behind. Others say he's pure wild, never once touched a leash. Last real sighting was 5 years ago. North Ridge, nobody ever caught him, but folks say he shows up when things go bad. Storms, accidents, fires." Ellie didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Barrett shook his head. "Well, kid, I think you just gave us the first proof he's real." The ranger who had been rescued. Agent Grant Lewis woke 2 days later in the hospital. His voice was weak, but his memories were sharp. He remembered the ambush, the stolen files, and the blow to the head that had left him for dead. But what he remembered most wasn't the pain or the cold. It was the feeling of something large and warm pressed against his side. In the night of breath, not human, but calm and steady. Keeping him tethered to life, he asked about the girl. When they told him her name, he smiled faintly. "She saved my life," he said, "but she wasn't alone." When they showed him photos of the rescue, he stopped at one not of Ellie or the medics, but a blurred background shot taken from a body cam just beyond the frame of the scene, a pair of eyes in the shadows. Pale, watching. "That's him," he said. "That's the one who stayed with me." The story changed after that. Not in the headlines. They still said, "Miracle rescue," and "Girl found Hero in woods," but in the spaces between conversations, in the lowered voices of rangers and researchers in the quiet nods exchanged by those who had once dismissed the old stories about the wolf. They called Ash Ellie, returned home, but something had shifted. At night, she'd sit on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and watch the treeing, listening for sounds she now understood weren't just wind or birds. She missed him, not like someone misses a pet, but like you miss a part of yourself that had gone walking ahead of you, and maybe wouldn't come back. Her mother tried to return them to normal life school, piano lessons, rules about bedtime, but Ellie had changed, and though she never acted out, never raised her voice, there was a quiet defiance to her now, like the woods had woven something into her bones. Then came the call from Ranger Barrett. He asked to see her, said there was something she should hear. They met at the base of Wild Pine Ridge, where Barrett had set up a temporary observation post. He handed her a pair of headphones and pressed play on a recorder. "Picked this up yesterday morning," he said. Ellie listened at first, just whined, then the rustle of movement too soft for human steps, too heavy for deer. A low, distant howl rose and faded, then came the sound of hooves, then voices. Two men talking in clipped tones, one of them angry. "You said the kid wouldn't make it that far." "She shouldn't have. I cut the fuel line." "She had no water, no food. She still found him." "If the feds connect us to that ranger's files." Barrett stopped the recording. "These guys are real," he said. Grant was investigating illegal land deals. He had names, dates, and someone wanted him out of the way, only they didn't count on a little girl and a wolf showing up in time. He looked at Ellie. "You ready to go back?" She nodded. The hike back up the ridge wasn't easy, but this time Ellie led her. Feet knew the way. When they reached the overlook, the valley stretched wide and empty. The wind carried the scent of pine and snow melt. But more than that, it carried something she could almost understand now, like the land was breathing. Barrett crouched near a rock where tracks had been marked in fresh mud. "Wolves were here," he said. "Yesterday, maybe less." Ellie knelt beside him and traced the paw print with her fingers, and then just for a moment she saw him, a shape between the trees, amber eyes catching the light. Watching, she didn't speak, didn't wave, just stood quiet as he turned and moved away, back into the woods. She knew what it meant. There were still truths hidden in the wilderness, still dangers, but she wasn't afraid because somewhere out there, Ash was still watching, and the forest was no longer silent. 1 year had passed since that winter night. Ella Grayson stumbled from the pines with a pack of wolves at her back in Bitterpine time, moved slow, but not for the valley that bore witness to what most had once called impossible. The snow had melted, seasons turned over, and in the hush that followed public scrutiny, something quieter, deeper had taken root. The research station was no longer a temporary platform hammered into earth between snowmelt and frost. Now it stood as a full structure, simple but sturdy. Anchored on the ridge, overlooking the heart of Ash's territory, it had been built not to disturb, but to observe, a shelter of stillness nestled into the land. There were no fences, no cameras that blinked or clicked, just long silent hours behind scopes and scribbled notes. A pact of distance held steady between human and wild Ash had grown visibly older. His coat, once the color of shadowed silver and ash-dusted stone, was now dulled with age. His gait had slowed, favoring his left side on the steeper inclines. Though no injury was recorded, he had not passed his place at the head of the pack. No young blood had overtaken him, though two strong males now ran close at his heels, learning his paths and matching his pauses when the pack moved toward the interaction field, a wide clearing where the wolves sometimes approached the humans. They had come to tolerate. It was still Ash who led them. Ellie was 10 now, taller, but not in the rushed, uncertain way. Some children grow. She moved like the valley, had left its rhythm in her bones. Dr. Ruth Hadley, now overseeing the expanded study team, had granted her limited access to the outermost line of the observation ring. A place adults were careful with, but the wolves accepted. Ellie had only to kneel, and the pack would come within range, never too close, but never afraid. Ruth's logs began filling with patterns she hadn't seen in other wolf populations. Every approach to the research zone was preceded by specific behaviors. One wolf always held back, stationed with clear visibility on the higher rock formations. Another circled wide before returning ears, alert and posture tense. A third, always. The same lean female led the others in, then waited at the edge until the full group had assembled. Ruth called it instinct at first, but the behavior repeated too often, too precisely. It was structure roles defined not by domination, but by deliberation. Meanwhile, in Denver, Noah Grayson's series, When Wolves Protect, began to ripple through national discourse. The story of Bitter Pines' pack, once dismissed as folklore or the product of rural hysteria, had become a data-backed phenomenon. His articles didn't romanticize, they contextualized. He wrote about the traps the wolves had avoided, the patterns they had followed to flank dangerous zones, the deliberate way they approached the injured and the vulnerable. More than once. Other hikers had reported moments of unexpected safety where a howl redirected their path or a lone wolf shadowed them back to a trailhead. Noah didn't call it magic. He called it mutualism. That word alone began showing up in policy drafts. Ellie's mother had been reluctant to return to Bitterpine. At first, too many memories, too many nights, clutching at the dark, not knowing whether her daughter would ever emerge again. But Ellie had asked, and quietly, firmly, had said that not all goodbyes were meant to last forever. When they returned in the spring, it was Ruth who extended the invitation. An international conservation summit was being hosted in Missoula, and Ellie had been requested to speak. The stage was tall, the room vast, filled with voices that shaped laws and built maps. But when Ellie stepped forward, the hush that settled across the auditorium was absolute. She didn't fidget or scan the crowd for comfort. Her voice didn't shake, and she said only what she needed to. They didn't save me because I was special. They saved me because they knew I couldn't save myself. There was no applause at first, just silence. Then slowly the room stood. Not for the child, not for the story, but for the truth that could no longer be shrugged off as anomaly. In Bitterpine, the research continued, though it had long since stopped being. Just research rangers arrived, not with guns, but with data sheets. Conservation groups brought equipment not to trap, but to listen. The valley once charted for development was now marked as sacred ground, a phrase rarely used in federal maps, but no one challenged it, and high above it all, Ash remained that evening. Ellie stood by the western ridge, where the old pine bent like a watchman over the slope she had not come for ceremony, only to see. And from the outcrop Ash was waiting. He no longer walked with the sureness of his youth, but he stood tall, his chest lifted against the wind, his fur catching the last of the golden light. Behind him the pack moved larger now, generations laced with his blood, some grayer, some leaner, but all steady. Ellie raised her hand, not as signal or command, but as greeting. Ash didn't move toward her. Nor did he retreat. He simply watched the same way he had on that first night, in the snow when she had fallen, and he had chosen not to turn away. The wind caught in the trees and carried no sound but breath, and the soft crush of paws across dry earth. Ash turned slow and regal, and led his pack down toward the valley floor. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. They had made their choice, and Bitterpine would remember